Today's reading, John chapter 21, verses 1 to 19. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach. But the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the nets on the right side of the boat. You will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it, and bread. Jesus said, "Bring me some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you that when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, he said, "Follow me." May God bless this reading to our understanding.
Sometimes it takes a while for transformation to take place, for transformation to really soak into your bones, to change who you are. Chapter 21 of John's Gospel is, well, maybe it's an appendix, maybe it's an afterthought, maybe it's like Detective Columbo, oh, just one more thing. Because the Gospel ends quite well at the end of chapter 20. The end of chapter 20 reads, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name." A nice, neat ending to the book. And then all of a sudden, after these things, many scholars believe that chapter 21 was indeed added on by a different writer. They believe that partially because of that break, but also partly because of the Greek and constructions and words that are used. But for most of us, the Gospel wouldn't be complete without that story, without Peter by the lake shore. Resurrection, Easter, doesn't just take place on one morning. The tomb is empty on one morning, the stone is rolled away, all those things. But Easter doesn't just happen then. It takes a while to soak in. In one gospel, Jesus says to Mary, "Tell my friends to go back to Galilee. I will meet them there." John Spong, retired bishop in the Episcopalian Church, has suggested that Easter, in the multitude of things it means, in the multitude of places and days it happened, partially happened in Galilee. It partially happened in Jerusalem, it partially happened on the road to Emmaus, but it partially happened in Galilee. In part because of this story. The friends have gone back to the beginning. They've gone back to where Jesus found them. Or in John's Gospel, where they found Jesus, because they seek him out. He doesn't seek them out. They've gone back to the beginning, and they're sitting around, and Peter says what seems totally natural. He's a fisherman. He made his life fishing. He was a fisherman long before Jesus came. Jesus is gone now. I'm going fishing. That was a really interesting chapter in my life. Now I'm going to go back to what I know. I'm getting things back to normal. And it's quite probable that he's doing this carrying with him grief and confusion. I mean, in John's Gospel, Jesus has seen the risen Christ. In chapter 20, Jesus comes into the upper room twice. At the beginning of chapter 20, Peter ran to the grave and saw it was empty. And then twice in an upper room, Jesus appears to them. Once with Thomas there and once with Thomas not there. As the story we shared at Children's Time told us. And yet, it doesn't seem to have sunk in yet. It doesn't seem to have had full transformative impact on his life yet. I'm going fishing. I don't know what else to do. Probably carrying his grief and his confusion. Probably, and we'll get to that in a moment, carrying that level of guilt. He who said, "I would never deny you." Not me. I could never do that. I tell you, 3 times before the cock crows. And indeed, that happened. Peter always wants life to get back to normal, and who can blame him? After a year, how many of us just want life to get back to normal? Back to the way it was before. How many times have you heard that over the past year? I can't wait till this is over and we can get back to where we were before. To do things the way we did before. That sermon title phrase, the new normal, has been heavily overused and abused in the last 20 years. It's been used to try to sell us on a variety of things. In the Bush administration post 9/11, it was used to try to convince us, well, we have to just put up with some of these extra security measures. We just have to put up with this wartime footing. Oh, and by the way, your patriotic duty is to go out and shop. That new normal is a phrase which rankles with many of us now because it's been so heavily used after everything. Oh, well, we just have to get back to the new normal. Well, things have changed now. This is the new normal. This is the new... We would like a chance maybe to get used to one new normal before the next one comes along. But Easter is the ultimate new normal. Resurrection is the ultimate new normal. Transformation by the presence of the risen Christ is the ultimate new normal. Peter tries to go fishing. And who shows up? Jesus has this uncomfortable habit. God has this uncomfortable habit of showing up just when we think we've got it all put together and we know where we're going. God tends to show up and says, surprise! Surprise! Jesus shows up. And Jesus doesn't show up with a clap of thunder and a light show. This is no superstar. Jesus shows up just standing on the beach and says, by the way, caught anything? Which every fisherman loves to hear after a full night of fishing and catching nothing. So, what do you caught? Why don't you try doing it differently? Throw your net on the right side of the boat. Again, something every professional loves to hear for somebody who, for all they know, knows nothing about their career to come up and say, you're doing it wrong. Try doing it this way. But Jesus shows up. And in that gentle conversation is revealed for who he is. It's the Lord, someone said. And Peter's so excited he throws clothes on and jumps into the water, which always has seemed backwards to me. Anybody who's tried swimming fully dressed knows that that's not the preferred way of doing it. But Peter is so excited he can't wait for the boat to get to shore. He has to get there. His attempt to go back to what he knew has been overturned because there's hope again. It's the Lord. He's here. He's present. He's with me. And so they get to shore. And they have a shore lunch or a shore breakfast. Fish and some bread. And Jesus meets Peter where he's at. Not just fishing in Galilee, which is where he met him before, but he meets Peter where he's at and he addresses what needs to be addressed. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Well, yes, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. Simon, son of John, do you love me? By which point Peter is getting a little irritated. and a little hurt, because the last thing we want to do when we expressed our love for somebody is to have them keep saying, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" Almost makes Jesus sound a little insecure. Yes, Lord, you know everything. You know how much I love you. From a literary perspective, it's quite obvious what's happening here. 3 denials, 3 affirmations. The guilt is met. Peter is reminded of who he is and who Jesus is in his life. Peter is reminded why he followed in the first place. Peter is reminded of everything. He's reminded who Jesus is. He's reminded that he loves Jesus. He's reminded that Jesus has a job for him. Thou art Petros, and upon this rock I will build my church. Peter starts the story wanting to go back to what he did before, wanting to go back to what he knew. And many of us, when life is turned over and when life is upset and when we don't really know what's going on, deep in us there's that part which says, if I could only go back. If I could only do life the way I did it before. If I could only be what was once so comfortable, so real. But then God shows up. When God shows up in our lives, it is to comfort us. When God shows up in our lives, it is to meet us where we're at. But also when God shows up in our lives, it's to challenge us to be different in some way, big or small. When God shows up in our lives, it's to say, there's something new here. And Jesus says to Peter after this threefold affirmation, when you were young, you could decide what you did. As you get older, that choice is taken away from you. Eventually, someone will put a belt on you and lead you away and stretch out your hands. Remember, this is the same Jesus who says to his friends, if you would follow me, take up your cross. Jesus is not promising Peter life is going to be any easier from now on. But still he says, follow me. That's Peter's new normal. That's where Peter's transformation becomes complete. Easter takes a while to sink in. Transformation takes a while to sink in. Most often. Most often, transformation isn't the zap of lightning and the thunderbolt and the flash of inspiration. In my experience, most often, transformation takes a while. It's hard. We have to work through what we're putting aside and what we're taking on. And Peter had to run back to Galilee. He had to go fishing. He had to reconnect with who he was, and God showed up and said, okay, next steps, let's go. We want to go back to the way things were. There's an old saying, you can never step into the same river twice. We can never go back to the way things were. But this Easter season, the second Easter season when we're living under pandemic, I challenge all of us to look to the shoreline. Whatever our equivalent of a shoreline might be. To look to the shoreline and see if we see that stranger standing there, saying, how's it going? You caught anything? Look to the shoreline and see where God is showing up. See where God is meeting us, and open our hearts to see where God is changing us, to see how God is calling us to live, who God is calling us to be, even if it's not exactly what we used to do. Amen.